The first snow of winter fell heavy across the Bighorn Mountains, coating the pines in thick white blankets that bent their branches toward the frozen earth. Clay Thornton pulled his collar higher against the biting wind as he guided his mare along the fence line, checking for breaks that might let his cattle wander into the deadly drifts. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pristine landscape, and the only sounds were the crunch of hooves through fresh powder and the occasional crack of ice-laden branches. He'd been riding the boundary of his ranch for 3 hours when he spotted them, 2 figures huddled against the weathered boards of the old abandoned stable on the north pasture. At first, Clay thought his eyes were playing tricks. Nobody came out this far, especially not with a storm brewing on the horizon. But as he drew closer, the shapes resolved into a woman and child, pressed together against the cruel December wind. The woman looked up as his horse approached, and Clay saw exhaustion etched deep in her features. Her dress, once blue calico, was torn and mud-stained. No coat worth mentioning covered her thin frame, just a woolen shawl that did little against Wyoming's winter fury. The boy sleeping against her shoulder couldn't have been more than 5 or 6, his small face pale with cold. "Ma'am," Clay said, touching the brim of his hat out of habit more than courtesy. His voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by years of solitary living. "You lost?" She struggled to her feet, swaying slightly, never letting go of the child. "Mr. Thornton?" Her voice was educated, Eastern maybe, though hoarse with cold. "I was told in town. They said you might need help with cooking and cleaning. I'm a hard worker, sir. My boy, too, when he's able." Clay's jaw tightened. He knew what the folks in Cedar Falls thought, that he needed a woman's touch around the place, that 10 years of bachelor living had made him half wild. They were probably laughing behind their hands, sending this desperate woman out to his door. "I don't recall advertising for help," he said, studying her carefully. Her feet, he noticed, were bleeding through the holes in her boots, the blood frozen dark against the leather. How far had she walked? "No, sir, you didn't." She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly despite her chattering teeth. "But winter's here, and I need work. Room and board for my son and me. That's all I ask. I can cook, clean, mend, tend animals. I'm not afraid of hard work." The boy stirred, whimpering softly, and she adjusted her hold on him with practiced ease. Clay saw how her hands shook, from cold or exhaustion. Maybe both. "What's your name?" he asked, though he wasn't sure why it mattered. "Margaret O'Brien," she said. "Folks call me Maggie. This is my son, Thomas." Clay looked from her to the child, then to the darkening sky where storm clouds gathered like wolves. His every instinct screamed caution. Women meant trouble. Always had. The last one who'd stood on his land had left with his savings and his best friend, leaving nothing but mockery and debt in their wake. That was 7 years past, but the lesson had stuck deep as a thorn. Yet here was winter coming hard, and these two wouldn't last the night in that drafty stable. Whatever game she might be playing, it would have to wait for warmer weather to reveal itself. "There's a woodshed behind the main house," he said finally, swinging down from his mare. "Got a stove and some old blankets. You can shelter there tonight. Come morning, we'll see about work." Relief flickered across her features before she schooled them back to cautious gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton. You won't regret—" "Save it." He cut her off. "I'm not doing this out of kindness. Ranch needs tending, and if you can work, maybe we can come to an arrangement. But I'll be watching. Try any tricks, and you'll be back on the road before you can blink." She nodded, adjusting the boy's weight again. Clay noticed how her legs trembled with each step as she followed him toward the house. Whatever her story, she'd been running hard from something, or someone. The ranch buildings came into view as they crested a small rise, the main house solid and square, built to withstand mountain winters, the barn and outbuildings arranged with practical efficiency. No flowers or curtains or any of those female touches that might soften the harsh lines. Just functional shelter against an unforgiving landscape. Clay led them to the woodshed. kicking open the door to reveal a small but dry space. The potbelly stove in the corner hadn't been lit in months, but it would work. Stacks of split pine lined one wall, and some old horse blankets hung from nails near the door. "There's a water pump behind the house," he said, already backing toward the door. "Outhouse is past the chicken coop. I take breakfast at sunrise." "Mr. Thornton," Maggie called as he turned to leave. When he glanced back, she was setting the boy down gently on a pile of wood shavings. "What kind of breakfast do you favor?" The question caught him off guard. "Coffee, black, biscuits if you can manage, bacon." He paused, frowning. "You got any belongings coming?" "What we're wearing is what we have," she said simply. No self-pity in it, just fact. Clay grunted and left, closing the door harder than necessary. Back in his own kitchen, he stood at the window watching smoke begin to curl from the woodshed chimney. The woman knew how to build a fire, at least. He made his own supper, cold beef and yesterday's bread, and tried not to think about what they might be eating. Probably nothing. That wasn't his problem, he told himself. Come morning, he'd likely find them gone. Having stolen whatever they could carry, that's what his brain said. Anyway, his conscience, rusty from disuse, suggested different, with a curse that would have scorched a minister's ears. Clay gathered some supplies, a loaf of bread, some jerked beef, 2 apples that were only half soft, and, after a moment's hesitation, a jar of preserves his nearest neighbor had forced on him last month. He added an old coat that had been hanging on a peg for years and one of his spare shirts that might serve as a nightgown for the boy. He knocked once on the woodshed door and set the bundle inside without looking at her, without acknowledging her stammered thanks. Back in his house, he barred the door and checked the loads in his rifle. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. That night, the wind howled like it was trying to tear the mountains down. Clay lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of fool he was becoming. Through his window, he could see the faint glow from the woodshed chimney. At least they'd be warm. He must have dozed, because he woke to the sound of movement in his kitchen. The clock showed 4:30. Grabbing his gun, Clay crept down the stairs, ready for trouble. But it was just her, Maggie, working by lamplight at his stove. She'd found his coffee and got it brewing, the familiar smell filling the cold kitchen. Biscuit dough was already rising on the table, and she was slicing bacon with quick, efficient movements. She'd washed her face and hands, pulled her dark hair back tight, and somehow made that torn dress look almost respectable. "Morning, Mr. Thornton," she said without turning around. "Coffee will be ready in 5 minutes." "How'd you get in?" His voice came out rough with sleep and suspicion. "Door wasn't locked, just barred. I lifted it through the window gap." She glanced back at him then, and maybe noticed the gun, because she added, "I knocked first." "You didn't answer, and I thought you'd want your breakfast on time." Clay set the rifle aside, feeling foolish but not admitting it. "Where's the boy?" "Sleeping still. The walk yesterday tired him out." She turned back to the stove, flipping bacon with practiced ease. "He won't be any trouble, I promise. Knows to stay quiet and out of the way." Something in how she said it made Clay frown. What kind of life had taught a child that young to be invisible? He sat at his usual place, watching her work. She moved around his kitchen like she'd been doing it for years, finding things without asking, making do with what was there. The coffee, when she poured it, was strong and black just how he liked it. The biscuits came out golden and light, the bacon crisp but not burned. "You weren't lying about knowing how to cook," he said grudgingly. "No, sir. I don't lie." She set a loaded plate in front of him and stepped back, hands folded. "Will you be wanting dinner at noon or evening?" "Noon," he said around a mouthful of biscuit. "Evenings for cold suppers mostly. You eaten?" "I'm fine, thank you." He looked up sharply. "That wasn't what I asked." Color touched her pale cheeks. "No, sir, but the boy ate last night, and that's what matters." Clay pushed his plate away, suddenly less hungry. "Sit, eat. I won't have anyone starving on my land. She hesitated, then took the chair across from him, accepting the plate he shoved her way. She ate carefully, trying not to look hungry and failing. When she finished, she immediately stood to clear the dishes. About that work, Clay said, leaning back. Ranch needs tending right enough, but I'm not running a charity. You'll work for your keep, both of you and the boys, Abel. Cooking, cleaning, mending. Help with the animals when needed. Sun up to sundown. No complaints. Yes, sir. I'm not a patient man. Mrs. O'Brien. Do your work. Stay out of my way otherwise, and we'll get along fine. Start any female nonsense, and you're gone. I understand. She met his eyes steadily. And it's just O'Brien. There's no Mr. anymore. He didn't ask how or why. Wasn't his business. Woodshed's yours long as you're here. There's some old furniture in the barn you can use if you've a mind to fix the place up some. He stood, reaching for his coat and hat. I'll be working the south pasture today. Need to bring the cattle closer before the real storms hit. At the door, he paused. That boy of yours, Thomas, he's sick or just worn out? Just tired, she said quietly. We've been traveling a while. From where? She turned back to the dishes. East of here. It wasn't an answer, but Clay didn't push. Everyone in Wyoming was running from something. Long as her troubles didn't become his, she could keep her secrets. He worked hard that day, harder than necessary, trying to exhaust the unease that had settled in his chest. The cattle were scattered across the lower slopes, and it took most of the morning to drive them down to the sheltered valleys closer to home. His horse did most of the work, well trained to the job, leaving Clay too much time to think. When he returned at noon, the smell of fresh bread met him at the door. The kitchen was transformed, scrubbed clean, windows washed. Even the old curtains, when had those appeared, beating fresh in the cold breeze from the open window. Maggie had dinner ready. Venison stew rich with wild onions and herbs he didn't know he had. Fresh bread still warm from the oven, and coffee that somehow tasted better than his own. The boy sat silent in the corner, playing with some wooden spoons. He looked better for a night's sleep and breakfast, though still too thin and pale. When Clay entered, the child went very still, watching with eyes too knowing for his age. Thomas, say hello to Mr. Thornton, Maggie prompted gently. Hello, sir, the boy whispered. Clay nodded awkwardly. Children made him nervous, almost as much as their mothers did. Boy. They ate in silence, Clay at the table, Maggie serving, then sitting with her son near the stove. It should have felt like an intrusion, these strangers in his space. Instead, it felt, he didn't have a word for it, different, maybe not bad different, which worried him more than if it had been. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the snow, Clay found himself at the window again. Smoke rose steady from the woodshed chimney. Through the small window, he could see Maggie moving about, probably putting the boy to bed. She was singing something, too faint to make out the words, but the melody drifted on the cold air like memory. He turned away, angry at himself for watching, angrier still for the warmth trying to kindle in his chest. He'd learned his lesson about women bearing sad stories and sweet songs. Martha had sung too, right up until she'd cleaned out his cash box and disappeared with Jake Morrison, leaving Clay the laughingstock of 3 counties. But as he banked the fire and headed for bed, Clay couldn't shake the image of bloody footprints in the snow, or the way Maggie had said there was no Mr. O'Brien anymore. Whatever she was running from, it had driven her to his door in winter with nothing but the clothes on her back and a child to protect. He'd given them shelter for now. Come spring, they'd move on like everyone else. That's what he told himself as sleep finally claimed him. While outside, the wind howled its lonely song across the mountains, and somewhere in the darkness, a wolf called to its mate, a sound full of longing that Clay pretended not to understand. The week settled into rhythm like snow-filling footprints, each day blending into the next with the quiet persistence of winter. Maggie O'Brien proved herself more valuable than Clay cared to admit. She moved through the ranch work like she'd been born to it, though her soft hands and educated speech suggested otherwise. By the third week, Clay found himself looking forward to breakfast without meaning to. She had a way with simple food that made it seem like more. Yesterday's bread became French toast with wild honey. Tough venison transformed into tender stews that warmed a man from the inside out. But it wasn't just the cooking. She'd taken to the ranch itself like a duck to water. One morning, Clay discovered her in the barn, examining the swollen knee of his best milk cow. Buttercup, the cow, normally skittish with strangers, stood placid as Maggie ran gentle hands over the injury. "It's just fluid buildup," she said without looking up at his approach. "Needs warm compresses twice a day, and some of that willow bark tea to bring down the swelling. She'll be right as rain in a week." "You know doctoring?" Clay leaned against the stall door, watching her work. My father was a physician back in Philadelphia." She glanced up, then away quickly. "I helped him sometimes. Before. Always before. Never the full story." Clay didn't push. He'd learned she'd offer pieces when she was ready, like breadcrumbs on a trail he wasn't sure he wanted to follow. "Show me what to do," he said instead. "Can't have you tending all the animals yourself." She looked surprised at that, then pleased, as she demonstrated the compress technique. Clay found himself noticing things he shouldn't. The way wisps of dark hair escaped her careful bun. The grace in her movements despite the rough work. The faint scent of lavender she somehow maintained even in a barn. Thomas had started shadowing Clay around the ranch when his mother was busy with household chores. The boy rarely spoke, but his eyes missed nothing. One afternoon, Clay found him trying to lift a hay bale nearly twice his size. "You'll hurt yourself, boy," Clay said, not unkindly. "Here, I'll show you how to use leverage instead of muscle." The child watched intently as Clay demonstrated using a pitchfork to break apart and move the hay. After a moment, Thomas tried it himself, managing a small portion with obvious pride. "Good," Clay said. "Farm work's about being smart, not just strong." "Yes, sir," Thomas whispered. Then, unexpectedly, "My PA said farm work was for fools who couldn't do better." Clay's hand stilled on the pitchfork. "Your PA was wrong." The boy studied him with those two old eyes. "Ma says he was wrong about a lot of things." That evening, Clay lingered over dinner longer than usual. Maggie had made chicken and dumplings, the kitchen warm with steam and comfortable smells. She was mending one of his shirts by lamplight while Thomas practiced his letters on a slate she'd somehow procured from town. "You went to school," Clay observed, watching the boy's careful penmanship. "In Philadelphia," Maggie confirmed, not looking up from her sewing. "Before we moved west." What brought a Philadelphia doctor's daughter to Wyoming territory? Her hands paused for just a moment. "My husband had ambitions. He thought the frontier would make him rich." Her voice held an edge sharp as winter wind. He was wrong about that too. Clay wanted to ask more but held back. Some stories had to emerge in their own time, like spring flowers through snow. Instead, he found himself talking about his own past, how he'd come west as a young man with dreams of cattle empire, how he'd built this ranch from nothing with his own hands and stubbornness. "Must have been lonely," Maggie said softly, tying off a thread. "All those years alone out here, a man gets used to his own company." But even as he said it, Clay realized how hollow it sounded. These past weeks had shown him just how empty the ranch had been, how the silence he'd wrapped around himself like armor had been slowly suffocating him. One night, a blizzard trapped them all in the main house, the woodshed. For all Maggie's improvements, wasn't safe in such weather. Clay made pallets by the big fireplace in the front room, gruffly insisting it was practical, not kindness. As the wind howled and snow piled against the windows, Maggie sang to keep Thomas calm. Her voice was clear and true, filling the room with old ballads and folk songs. Clay pretended to read his week-old newspaper, but found himself listening instead. One song in particular caught him, a mournful tune about a woman waiting for a love who'd never return. "That's a sad one," he commented when she finished. She was braiding Thomas's hair for sleep, her fingers gentle and sure. My mother used to sing it. She said sad songs were more honest than happy ones. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Maggie tucked a blanket around her son, who was already drowsing. She died when I was 15. That's when Father decided we should come west. He couldn't bear Philadelphia without her. Clay set aside his paper. In the firelight, he could see the sorrow etched in her features, the weight of losses that went beyond just her husband. I'm sorry. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Clay felt something shift in his chest. So am I. Sorry for a lot of things. The next morning dawned crystal clear, the storm having blown itself out. Clay was breaking ice on the water troughs when he noticed Maggie chopping wood by the shed. She'd gotten better at it over the weeks, but her form was still awkward, the axe too heavy for her frame. You'll throw your back out swinging like that, he called. She straightened, pushing hair from her face. Then perhaps you'd better show me the right way. Was that challenge in her voice? Clay found himself almost smiling as he walked over. First, you're choking up too high on the handle. Here. He moved behind her, adjusting her grip. The closeness was necessary for instruction, he told himself, even as he became aware of her warmth, the way she tensed, then relaxed at his touch. His hands covered hers on the axe handle, guiding the motion. Feel the weight work for you, he said, his voice rougher than intended. Let gravity do half the job. They swung together once, twice, the log splitting clean on the third stroke. Maggie turned her head slightly, and suddenly her face was inches from his. Clay could see gold flecks in her brown eyes, could count the freckles across her nose. Thank you, she breathed. Clay stepped back abruptly, heat climbing his neck. Practice that. I've got work to do. He strode away without looking back, cursing himself for a fool. This was exactly what he'd sworn wouldn't happen, but throughout the day, he couldn't stop thinking about how right she'd felt in the circle of his arms. That evening, Clay took supper in the barn, claiming a sick calf needed watching. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Maggie didn't challenge him. Through the barn window, he could see her and Thomas in the kitchen, the boy helping dry dishes while she washed. A domestic scene so normal it made his chest ache. Around midnight, unable to sleep, Clay sat by the dying fire nursing a cup of coffee. He heard soft footsteps on the stairs and didn't turn when Maggie entered the room. Couldn't sleep either? She asked softly. Calf's doing better, he said, maintaining the fiction. She moved to the other chair, curling up with her feet tucked under her nightgown. Clay tried not to notice how young she looked with her hair loose around her shoulders. I should tell you, she began, staring into the fire. About my husband, about why we left. You don't owe me explanations. Maybe not, but you've been kind to us, and... She took a breath. His name was Richard. He was charming when he wanted something, cruel when he didn't get it. I was 17 when we married, too young to see past his handsome face and pretty promises. Clay's hands tightened on his cup, but he said nothing. He killed my father. She said it flat, emotionless. Oh, not with his hands. With debt and drink and shame. Father signed notes for Richard's business ventures, each one more foolish than the last. When they all failed, it broke him. His heart gave out last winter. Maggie. After that, Richard decided we'd go west. Said he'd strike it rich in mining or cattle or whatever scheme caught his fancy. But mostly he drank and gambled and... She touched her shoulder absently, and Clay remembered the burn scar he'd glimpsed. When he was drunk, he was worse than cruel. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, their calls lonely in the vast night. The fire? Clay asked quietly. He came home drunk one night in Colorado, angrier than usual. He'd lost our last money at cards. He knocked over a lamp throwing things. The house was old, dry wood. It went up so fast. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He wouldn't let us leave at first. Said we'd burn with his worthless life. But when the roof started falling, he panicked, ran out and left us there. Clay was on his feet without remembering standing. Rage, hot and pure, flooded through him. I got Thomas out through a window, Maggie continued. Went back for what I could save. Papers, a little money he didn't know about. That's when... She gestured to her shoulder. A burning beam fell. After that, things get hazy. I remember Thomas pulling me out. My brave boy, only 6 years old, dragging his mother from a burning house. Where is Richard now? Clay's voice was dangerous. Dead. She said it simply. He went back in, looking for his hidden whiskey stash. The neighbors said they could hear him screaming, but the fire was too strong by then. They found him the next morning. Good, Clay said savagely. Saved me the trouble of killing him myself. Maggie looked up at him, tears tracking silver down her cheeks. They blamed me anyway. Said I must have said it. Must have wanted him dead. The sheriff was Richard's drinking companion. He gave me 2 days to leave town or face charges. But it wasn't. Does it matter? A woman with no money, no family, no proof. I ran. We've been running since. Town to town, always looking over my shoulder. Always afraid someone would recognize us from the wanted notices. Clay knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his. You're not running anymore. You're safe here. Am I? She searched his face. You don't know what it's like. Clay, being hunted, being afraid every stranger might be the one who, then we'll face it together. The words came out before he could stop them. Anyone wants to take you from this ranch. They go through me first. She squeezed his hands, fresh tears falling. Why? Why would you risk that for us? Clay wanted to tell her it was just basic decency, that he'd do the same for anyone, but kneeling there in the firelight, holding her hands, feeling her pain like it was his own, he couldn't lie anymore. Because this place has been dead for 10 years, he said roughly. Just me going through the motions, telling myself I liked the quiet. Then you showed up and suddenly there's life here again. Laughter in the kitchen, singing in the evening. Someone who cares if I come home cold and tired. He paused, struggling with words that felt rusty from disuse. I was frozen. Maggie, frozen solid as that creek in January. You and Thomas, you're thawing me out. She freed one hand to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his weathered cheek. Oh, Clay, we were frozen too. Running but not living. Scared but not careful enough. You gave us shelter when you had every reason to turn us away. You gave Thomas a man to look up to who doesn't solve problems with his fists. You gave me... What? His voice was barely a whisper. What did I give you? Hope, she said simply. For the first time in years. Hope that maybe we could stop running. Maybe we could have a real home. Clay turned his face into her palm, pressing a kiss there that felt like a promise. This is your home, for as long as you want it. Both of you. She was crying in earnest now, and Clay pulled her down into his arms, holding her while she sobbed out years of fear and grief and loneliness. He stroked her hair and murmured nonsense comfort, and felt his own eyes burn with tears he hadn't shed since his mother died. When the storm passed, they sat quietly on the floor before the fire, Maggie curled against his chest, Clay's arms secure around her. Neither spoke. Words would have broken the spell, but as the fire died to embers and the night grew cold around them, something new kindled between them, fragile as spring ice, precious as first snow, warm as summer sun on winter-starved skin. Eventually, Maggie stirred. I should check on Thomas. Stay, Clay said, just a bit longer. She relaxed back against him, and they watched the fire together. Two souls finding unexpected shelter in each other as Wyoming winter wrapped its frozen arms around the world outside. The days after their fireside confession passed in a strange dance of nearness and distance. Clay threw himself into ranch work with renewed vigor, as if he could outrun the feelings that had taken root in his chest. He was up before dawn, often not returning until well after dark, pushing himself and his horse to exhaustion, checking fence lines that didn't need checking, counting cattle he'd already counted twice. Maggie, for her part, seemed to understand his need for space. She kept to her routines, cooking, cleaning, mending, but Clay caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking. There was patience in her gaze, and something else that made his breath catch. It was Thomas who finally broke the awkward tension. One evening, the boy approached Clay as he sat on the porch cleaning his rifle. "Mr. Clay," Thomas said, using the name he'd recently adopted despite Clay's gruff insistence that Thornton was fine. "Ma's been crying." Clay's hand stilled. "She hurt?" "No, sir. She cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. Every night since the storm." The accusation in those young eyes was clear. Clay set down the rifle, studying the child who'd become braver these past weeks. Brave enough to confront a grown man about his mother's tears. "Sometimes adults need to work things out in their own time, boy," Clay said carefully. "Pa used to say that too, right before he'd hurt her again." Thomas's chin lifted, defiant. "You're not like Pa, are you?" "No," Clay said firmly. "I'm not. Then why are you acting like him, staying away, making her sad?" The question hit like a physical blow. Clay rubbed his face, feeling every one of his 35 years. "It's complicated. Thomas." "No, it's not." The boy moved closer, his small face earnest. "Ma smiles when you're around, real smiles, not the pretend ones. And you smile too, even if you try to hide it. Why is that complicated?" Out of the mouths of babes, Clay thought. He looked toward the kitchen window where lamplight spilled golden across the snow. He could see Maggie's silhouette moving about, probably preparing tomorrow's bread. "You're right," he said finally. "I've been a fool." Thomas nodded solemnly. "Ma says everyone's foolish sometimes. The trick is stopping once you know better." Clay found himself almost smiling. "Your ma's a wise woman." "Yes, sir. That's why you should listen to her more." The boy headed inside, leaving Clay alone with his thoughts and the weight of truth simply spoken. He sat there a long while, watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky, gathering courage he hadn't needed since facing down a grizzly bear 5 years back. Finally, he stood and walked to the kitchen. Maggie was indeed making bread, her arms flour-dusted to the elbows. She looked up at his entrance, surprise flickering across her features. "Clay, is everything all right?" "No," he said honestly. "No, it's not. I've been acting like a damned fool. Maggie, pardon my language." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Waiting. That night, by the fire, I meant every word. But come morning, I got scared." He forced himself to meet her eyes. "Last woman I trusted took everything I had and made me a laughing stock. I swore I'd never let anyone that close again. Then you came along, and suddenly all those walls I built didn't mean nothing. Clay, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "I've been hiding out there with the cattle because it's easier than facing what I feel. But your boy just gave me a talking to that made me see I'm hurting you by being a coward. And that's the last thing I want." Maggie moved closer, stopping just out of reach. "What do you feel, Clay? I need to hear you say it." "I feel like a man waking up after a long sleep," he said roughly. "I feel like every sunset's prettier with you to share it with. I feel like this house is finally a home instead of just shelter. I feel..." He swallowed hard. "I feel like I'm falling for you, Maggie O'Brien, and it terrifies me more than any blizzard or wildfire could." She closed the distance between them, reaching up to cup his face. "Do you think you're the only one who's scared? I buried a monster wearing my husband's face, fled with nothing but my child and the clothes on my back. I swore I'd never trust another man, never give anyone power to hurt us again. But here you are, Clay Thornton, making me believe in kindness again, making me want things I thought were dead and buried with my father." "What things?" His voice was hoarse. "Safety, peace, a man who looks at me like I'm precious instead of property, a father for my son who teaches instead of terrorizes, a partner instead of a master." She stroked her thumb across his cheekbone. "Love that builds up instead of tears down." Clay covered her hand with his, turning to press a kiss to her palm. "I can't promise I'll be good at this. I've been alone too long, set in my ways. And I can't promise I won't have nightmares or jump at shadows. We're both carrying scars. Clay, maybe that's why we fit, he suggested. Two broken pieces making something whole. She smiled then, soft and genuine. Thomas will be pleased. He's been lecturing me about giving you time to come around. Smart boy, gets it from his mother. His mother, who's currently covered in flour and probably looks a fright. Clay studied her, hair escaping its pins, flour smudged on her nose, old apron over a patched dress, and felt his heart turn over. You're beautiful, Maggie, just like this, just how you are. She blushed, but didn't look away. Will you stay for coffee? After Thomas goes to bed, we could talk. I'd like that. Clay said, I'd like that very much. That night established a new pattern. After Thomas was tucked in, Clay and Maggie would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes just sharing comfortable silence. It was during one of these evening conversations that Maggie showed him something that changed everything. I kept this, she said, pulling a folded paper from her apron pocket. From Richard's things. I don't know why. Maybe I knew someday I'd need it. Clay unfolded it carefully. It was a legal document. Richard O'Brien's will, leaving everything to his wife. But what caught Clay's attention was the note scrawled on the back in different handwriting. Insurance money came through, fire ruled accidental, $500 waiting at Denver Merchants Bank. Sorry for your loss. J. Morrison, attorney. This proves you didn't set the fire. Clay said slowly, they wouldn't pay insurance on arson. I know, but Sheriff Watson didn't care about proof. He cared about his drinking friend being dead and needing someone to blame. She twisted her hands together. I was too scared to go to Denver. Afraid it was a trap. We've been running on nothing, taking charity, working for scraps. Clay folded the paper and handed it back. First thaw. We'll ride to Denver together, get your money and clear your name proper. We? You think I'd let you go alone? Besides, Thomas needs to see his mother standing tall, getting justice, and you need to stop looking over your shoulder. Tears filled her eyes. I don't deserve this. Don't deserve you. Clay pulled her into his arms, holding her close. That's where you're wrong, Maggie girl. We deserve whatever happiness we can carve out of this hard life. Both of us. The next few days passed in a blur of ordinary moments, made extraordinary by their new understanding. Clay found excuses to linger in the kitchen, stealing kisses when Thomas wasn't looking. Maggie's touches became more frequent, a hand on his shoulder as she served coffee, fingers brushing his as she passed him tools. It was a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks after their kitchen conversation, when everything shifted again. Clay had spent the day breaking ice on the creek, hard work that left him sore and tired. He'd dozed off in his chair by the fire, lulled by the warmth and the soft sounds of Maggie putting Thomas to bed upstairs. He stirred sometime later, aware of a presence near him but keeping his eyes closed, not quite ready to move. Then he felt it, a gentle touch on his hair, fingers combing through the strands with infinite tenderness. His mother used to do that when he was small, before fever took her. But this was different. This touch held something more than maternal care. Maggie was humming softly, that sad melody about waiting for a love who'd never return. Her fingers moved from his hair to trace the lines of his face, the scar on his temple from a bar fight in his younger days, the crow's feet earned from years of squinting into prairie sun, the jaw he'd clenched for so long it had forgotten how to relax. My sweet, stubborn man, she whispered, so quiet, he almost missed it. Wearing yourself out trying to prove you're worth believing in, when I already know you are. Clay's throat tightened. He should let her know he was awake. But something held him still. Her touch moved to his shoulders, kneading the tension there with surprising skill. I dream about telling you, she continued, still in that barely there whisper. About saying the words out loud in daylight when you can't pretend not to hear. But I'm a coward too. Clay Thornton. Scared you'll think it's too soon. Too much. Scared I'll ruin this perfect thing we're building. Her hands stilled, resting on his shoulders. He felt her lean closer, her breath warm against his ear. "I love you," she breathed, the words so soft they might have been wind through the chinks in the walls. "God help me. I fought against it, but I love you. Not for saving us, not for the shelter or the food or the safety. I love you for the way you teach Thomas about honor, for how you talk to your horses like they're old friends, for the pride in your eyes when you look at this land you've built with your own hands." Clay's chest felt too tight, like his ribs might crack from the pressure building inside. He wanted to open his eyes, pull her into his arms, speak his own truth, but she wasn't finished. "I love you for your wounds as much as your strength, for trusting us with your heart when everything in you must scream to protect it, for being gentle when life taught you to be hard." A drop of wetness hit his cheek. Her tears. "I love you knowing you might never feel the same, knowing I might be another Martha to you, another woman who wants too much, but I had to say it, even if you're sleeping, even if you never hear." She pressed a feather-light kiss to his forehead, then started to pull away. Clay's hand shot up, catching hers before she could go. "I hear you," he said roughly, opening eyes that burned with unshed tears. "I hear every word, Maggie girl." She gasped, trying to pull back, but he held fast. "Clay, my turn." He tugged her around the chair and into his lap, cradling her against his chest. "You think it's too soon? I've been choking on these feelings since the day you faced down a blizzard to feed my stock. You think you're another Martha. Martha never saw past my bank account to the man underneath. She never cared if I came home frozen or fed, long as the money kept coming." Maggie was trembling in his arms, her face hidden against his neck. "But you," Clay continued, "you see me. Not the rancher or the loner or the bitter fool nursing old wounds. You see Clay, just Clay, and somehow that's enough for you. Well, I see you too, Margaret O'Brien. I see your courage and your kindness and your fierce love for that boy. I see how you make beauty out of nothing, create warmth in a cold place, bring music where there was only silence." He tipped her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I love you, Maggie. Love you so much it scares me stupid. Love you enough to fight the whole world to keep you safe. Love you enough to learn how to be the man you deserve." She was crying openly now, both hands framing his face. "You already are. Oh, Clay, you already are." He kissed her then, pouring all his bottled-up emotion into the contact. She responded with equal fervor, years of loneliness and pain dissolving in the heat between them, when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Clay rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said suddenly. "I know it's fast. No folks will talk, but I don't care. Marry me, Maggie. Make this real and right and permanent." "Clay, we'll go to Denver. Clear your name, then find a preacher. Make you Mrs. Thornton, legal and proper. Give Thomas my name too, if he'll have it. Be a real family, not just playing at it." She was laughing and crying at once. "Yes, yes to all of it. Yes to forever." He kissed her again, sealing the promise. Outside, the wind howled its lonely song, but inside the circle of their arms, spring had already come. The thaw was complete, two frozen hearts melting into one warmth that would see them through whatever winter tried to throw their way. When they finally made their way upstairs, pausing at Thomas's door to check on him, they found the boy awake and grinning. "About time," he said. "Can I call you Pa now?" Clay's throat closed entirely. He felt Maggie's hand slip into his, squeezing encouragement. "I'd be honored, son," he managed. "I'd be right honored." Thomas's smile could have lit the whole territory. "Good. Pa, I like how that sounds." As they tucked him back in, Clay caught sight of their reflection in the window. A man, a woman, and a child, backlit by lamplight like a family portrait. Not perfect, not without scars, but real and solid in his. He'd spent 10 years thinking he was protecting himself, building walls against hurt. But Maggie had been right that night in the kitchen. Sometimes the walls meant to protect became the very things that imprisoned. It took her gentle touch, her patient love, her quiet courage to show him that. The test of pretended sleep had revealed more than either expected, not deception or manipulation, but a love too deep for daylight, too precious for common words. In her secret touch, Clay had found his salvation. In his listening heart, Maggie had found her home. And in the morning, with the sun painting the mountains gold and breakfast warming on the stove, they'd begin the rest of their lives together, no longer running, no longer hiding, no longer alone. The blizzard struck 3 days after their engagement, howling down from the north like a living thing bent on destruction. Clay had seen the signs, the way the cattle bunched together, the peculiar color of the sunset, the ache in his bones from an old break. But even he hadn't expected the storm's fury. By the second day, snow had drifted past the windows of the main house. The woodshed where Maggie and Thomas had first sheltered was completely buried, only the tip of its chimney poking through like a periscope. Clay thanked God he'd insisted they move into the house proper after their betrothal. "We're running low on firewood," Maggie said, checking their dwindling stack by the fireplace. The storm had caught them unprepared, most of their wood still in the buried shed. "I'll dig a path," Clay said, reaching for his coat. In this, she gestured at the window where the snow drove horizontal, visibility maybe 3 feet. "Clay, you won't find the shed, much less make it back." He knew she was right, but the alternative, letting the fire die, freezing in their own home, was unthinkable. "We can burn furniture if we have to. Start with the chairs from the spare room." They spent the morning breaking up an old dresser, feeding the hungry fire piece by piece. Thomas helped, trying to make a game of it, but Clay could see the fear in the boy's eyes. He remembered being young and trapped by weather, the way it made you feel small and helpless against nature's indifference. By evening, they'd moved everything into the main room, blankets, food, water buckets before they froze. The temperature dropped steadily despite the fire. Ice formed on the inside of the windows, and their breath came in visible clouds. "Tell us a story, Ma," Thomas said, burrowing deeper into the blankets they'd piled on the floor. "About when it's warm again." Maggie pulled him close, meeting Clay's eyes over the boy's head. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a beautiful valley where spring came early and stayed late. Wildflowers grew tall as a man's knee, and the grass was so green it hurt your eyes." Clay fed another chair leg to the fire, calculating grimly. At this rate, they had maybe 2 days of fuel, 3 if they were careful. The storm showed no signs of breaking. That night, they slept in a pile like puppies, sharing warmth and comfort. Clay stayed awake, listening to the wind scream, feeling the house shudder under the assault. Sometime near dawn, he heard a crack like a gunshot, a beam in the roof, stressed by snow weight. "Clay?" Maggie's whisper in the darkness. "What was that?" "Just the house settling." He lied. "Go back to sleep." But she didn't. Instead, she pressed closer, her hand finding his in the dark. "Are we going to be all right?" He wanted to comfort her with easy lies, but she deserved truth. "I don't know, but I promise you this. Whatever happens, we face it together." The third day dawned without dawn, the storm so thick they couldn't tell morning from night except by the clock. They were down to burning books and floorboards pried up from the spare room. Thomas had developed a cough that worried Clay more than he let on. "I should check on the livestock," Clay said, though he knew it was hopeless. Any animal not in the barn was dead by now. "Don't you dare," Maggie said fiercely. "Don't you dare leave us. Clay Thornton, the cattle aren't worth your life. They're our future." "No." She gripped his arm hard enough to bruise. "We are our future. You and me and Thomas. The ranch means nothing if you're not here to share it." He saw his own fear reflected in her eyes, not of dying, but of separation, of losing what they'd just found. "All right," he said. "All right, Maggie girl. I'll stay." That afternoon, the roof beam cracked again, louder. Clay watched ceiling dust drift down and made a decision. "We need to move to the root cellar," he said. "It's smaller, easier to heat, and no roof to collapse." The cellar was accessed through a trap door in the kitchen floor. Clay went first. clearing space among the preserved vegetables and canned goods Maggie had put up. It was cramped and dark, but the earth walls held heat better than the drafty house. They made the space as comfortable as possible, blankets on the packed dirt floor, candles in the corners, their remaining food within reach. It felt like a cave, primitive and close, but safe from the storm's worst fury. "It's an adventure," Maggie told Thomas, though her voice shook. "Like the stories about pioneers living underground. Will we see the sun again?" "Pa," Thomas asked. And the simple faith in that question, that Clay would know, would fix it, nearly broke him. "Sure we will, son. This storm can't last forever. Few more days at most." But as night fell, or what they assumed was night in their earthen dark, Clay faced hard truths. They had food for maybe a week if they rationed carefully. Water wasn't a problem. They could melt snow. But warmth, the candles wouldn't last long. And without proper ventilation, a real fire would suffocate them. He must have dozed, because he woke to Maggie's shaking him urgently. "Clay! Listen!" At first, he heard only the storm. Then, silence. Blessed, impossible silence. They climbed out cautiously. The house was frigid, their breath crystallizing instantly. But pale sunlight filtered through the ice-covered windows. The storm had broken. "Thank God," Maggie breathed, then louder, laughing. "Thank God!" Clay kicked open the door, or tried to. Snow had drifted past the lintel. He had to dig with his hands, Maggie helping, until they could squeeze through. The world outside was transformed. Snow lay 15 feet deep in places, sculpted into fantastic shapes by the wind. The barn roof was partially collapsed, the chicken coop gone entirely, but the sun shone brilliant on this white new world. And they were alive. "The animals," Clay said, heart sinking. "Our animals." Maggie said firmly, "We'll start over, build back better, together." He looked at her, hair wild, face smudged with dirt from the cellar. Thomas clinging to her skirts, and felt such love it staggered him. "How are you so strong?" She smiled, the expression like spring itself. "Because I have something to be strong for. 2 somethings." They spent the rest of the day digging out, checking damage, salvaging what they could. The losses were significant. Half the chickens frozen, several cattle dead, feed stores damaged. But as Clay worked, Maggie beside him, Thomas helping as he could, he found he couldn't despair. They'd survived. More than that, they'd survived together. Each moment of fear and cold shared and thus halved. When Maggie's first husband had tried to burn her out, she'd saved only her son and her life. But here, facing nature's fury, she'd saved him too, not just his body but his spirit, keeping him from the desperate foolishness that might have killed him. That night, back in the house with the fire-burning furniture they no longer needed, Clay pulled out his mother's Bible. He wasn't a religious man particularly, but some moments called for ceremony. "I know we said we'd wait for Denver and a preacher," he said, "but seems to me God just married us proper, for better or worse, in sickness and health, through blizzards and whatever else Wyoming throws at us." Maggie's eyes shone. "Clay Thornton, are you proposing to marry me right here in our kitchen?" "I'm proposing to call you my wife starting now," he said. "Let the law catch up when it can. Thomas needs parents, not folks playing at maybe. And I need to know you're mine and I'm yours. Official-like." She looked at Thomas, who nodded solemnly. "Ma, I think Pa's right. We're already a family. Words don't change what is." From the mouths of babes. Again. Maggie took Clay's hands, rough and cold-chapped from the day's work. "Then I take you as my husband, Clayton Thornton, to have and hold from this day forward, through storms and sunshine, plenty and want. I promise to stand beside you, believe in you, and love you until my last breath." Clay's voice came out rough with emotion. "And I take you as my wife, Margaret O'Brien soon-to-be Thornton. I promise to protect you, provide for you, and cherish you all my days, to be a father to Thomas and a husband to you in deed as well as word, to never let pride or fear come between us again." "Can I say something?" Thomas piped up. They looked at him. This child who'd seen too much but somehow maintained his sweetness. "I take you both as my parents," he said carefully, as if he'd been thinking about the words. "I promise to mind you and help with chores and not track mud in the house too much, and to love you both forever and ever." Maggie made a sound between laugh and sob, pulling them both into her arms. They stood there in their damaged kitchen, surrounded by storm debris and melting snow, and Clay knew he'd never felt richer in his life. Later, after Thomas was asleep, Clay and Maggie sat close on their makeshift bed by the fire. The night was clear, stars visible through the window, the temperature dropping fast without cloud cover. "I was so frightened," Maggie admitted quietly. "Not just of dying, but of losing this, us, before we really had a chance to live it. But we didn't lose it," Clay reminded her. "If anything, we found more. I've weathered a dozen blizzards alone, Maggie, but this one, having you and Thomas to protect, to worry about, to keep warm, it changed everything. Made me realize what I've been missing all those lone winters." She traced patterns on his chest, thoughtful. "Richard would have blamed me for the storm somehow. Found a way to make it my fault. His suffering my responsibility. But you just handled what needed handling. No anger, no accusations. Just steady strength when we needed it most. You gave as good as you got," Clay said, keeping spirits up, making that cellar seem like an adventure instead of a desperate hideaway. "Teaching me that sometimes the brave thing is staying put instead of charging out foolish." "We make a good team," she said softly. "The best," he agreed, then tipped her chin up. "Wife." Her smile bloomed slow and sweet. "Husband." They came together in the firelight, celebrating survival and commitment. Life affirmed in the most basic way. Outside, the temperature plummeted toward zero, but in their bed of salvaged blankets, warmth lived and breathed and promised tomorrow. The blizzard had tested them, not just their physical endurance, but the strength of their new bond, in the crucible of crisis, with death howling at their door. They'd chosen each other again and again. Clay reaching for Maggie's hand in the dark, Maggie pulling him back from danger, both of them sheltering Thomas, showing him what real partnership looked like. They were different people than they'd been 3 days ago. The polite distances, the careful courtesies, all burned away like dross, leaving only the pure metal of their connection. They'd seen each other afraid, exhausted, pushed to the edge, and at each revelation, love had grown stronger, not weaker, as sleep finally took them, wrapped in each other's arms while the house creaked and settled in the cold. Clay's last thought was of spring. It would come, as it always did. They'd rebuild what was lost, replant what had died, and they'd do it together, husband and wife, father and mother, partners in this hard, beautiful life they were carving from the wilderness. The storm had tried to break them. Instead, it had forged them into something unbreakable, a family tempered by trial, strengthened by survival, bound by choice and chance and the wild Wyoming wind that had driven them into each other's arms to stay. Spring came late to the mountains that year, but when it arrived, it came with a vengeance. Snow melted in rushing torrents, turning creeks into rivers and meadows into temporary lakes. The ranch, battered but unbroken, began to show signs of life again, green shoots pushing through mud, surviving cattle growing sleek on new grass, the rebuilt chicken coop filling with the sound of laying hens. Clay and Maggie had settled into their new life with the comfortable rhythm of a couple married 20 years. Not 2 months, but beneath the surface, contentment. Clay sensed Maggie's growing restlessness. She would stand at the window sometimes, staring east toward the distant mountains that hid Colorado, and her past. Her nightmares had returned, leaving her gasping and sweat-soaked in the dark hours before dawn. "We should go," Clay said one morning over breakfast. "To Denver. Clear your name like we planned." Maggie's hands stilled on the bread she was slicing. "The ranch needs you here. The cattle will survive a week without me. Tom Brennan owes me a favor. He'll look after things." Clay covered her hand with his. "This is eating at you, Maggie girl. Every rider that comes down the road, you tense up. Every time I go to town, you're watching for bad news when I return. That's no way to live. What if they arrest me the moment we arrive?" Her voice came out small, scared. "What if that sheriff sent word ahead? What if—" "Then I'll hire the best lawyer money can buy and fight like hell," Clay said firmly. "But running from shadows isn't the answer. We face this together. Remember?" Thomas, who'd been quietly eating his porridge, looked up. "Are we going on a trip?" "Maybe," Maggie said carefully. "Would you like to see a big city?" The boy considered this. "Will there be trains?" "Definitely trains," Clay assured him. "And buildings taller than trees, and more people than you've ever seen in one place." "Then I want to go," Thomas decided. "But we're coming back, right? This is home." The simple certainty in his voice seemed to steady Maggie. "Yes," she said. "This is home. We're definitely coming back." They set out a week later, Clay driving the wagon while Maggie and Thomas rode beside him. The journey would take 4 days if the weather held. Following the old stage road through the passes, Clay had strapped on his guns, something he rarely did around the ranch, and noticed Maggie watching him check the loads. "Just a precaution," he said. "Road agents sometimes work these trails." But they both knew he was thinking of other dangers. Bounty hunters, perhaps, or lawmen with long memories and flexible attitudes toward jurisdiction. The first 2 days passed peacefully. They camped under star-scattered skies, Thomas delighting in sleeping outdoors, Maggie gradually relaxing as each mile put more distance between them and the ranch. Clay told stories of his early days in Wyoming, when the territory was even wilder, and Maggie shared memories of Philadelphia before her father fell under Richard's influence. On the 3rd day, everything changed. They'd stopped at a creek to water the horses when Clay heard it, the distinctive click of a hammer being cocked. He turned slowly, hand moving toward his gun, then froze. 3 men had emerged from the cottonwoods, all armed, all focused on Maggie. "Well, well," the leader said, a lean man with dead eyes and a sheriff's star that had seen better days. "Mrs. O'Brien, or should I say, Mrs. Richard O'Brien, wanted for murder and arson in Cedar Creek, Colorado." Maggie went white as bone. Thomas pressed against her side, and Clay felt rage building in his chest like steam in a boiler. "You've got the wrong woman," Clay said evenly. "This is my wife, Margaret Thornton." The man laughed. An ugly sound. "Nice try, cowboy. But I've been tracking her for months. That reward money's going to set me up real nice." He focused on Maggie. "Though I gotta say, ma'am, Sheriff Watson might be willing to forget the whole thing if you were accommodating. He took your husband's death real personal." Clay's gun was in his hand before conscious thought. "You'll step away from my family now. 3 guns to your 1, the bounty hunter observed. "You sure you want to play those odds?" "Pa?" Thomas's voice was tiny, terrified. "It's all right, son," Clay said, not taking his eyes off the men. "These gentlemen were just leaving. Like hell we were." But the bounty hunter looked less certain now. Faced with Clay's steady hand and steadier gaze. "Look, mister, this ain't your fight. Woman killed her husband, burned him alive. That's murder where I come from." "He was beating us," Maggie said suddenly, her voice stronger than Clay expected. "He knocked over the lamp himself, in a drunken rage. He wouldn't let us leave until the roof started falling. I have proof, insurance documents stating the fire was accidental. Sheriff Watson says different. Sheriff Watson was Richard's drinking companion." Clay said, "His word against insurance investigators? Against sworn documents? You want to bet your life on that holding up in a real court?" The second bounty hunter, younger and clearly nervous, spoke up. "Jake, maybe we should—" "Shut up!" Jake snapped. But Clay saw the doubt creeping in. These weren't lawmen, just opportunists chasing easy money. Faced with real resistance, their resolve was wavering. "Tell you what," Clay said, his voice reasonable but his gun never wavering. You boys turn around and ride away. Forget you ever saw us. Or we can dance right here, and whoever's left standing can explain to the territorial marshal why there are bodies by the creek. Your choice." The silence stretched taut as fence wire. A hawk cried overhead. Thomas's breathing sounded loud as thunder. Then, finally, Jake holstered his gun. "This ain't over," he said. "That reward's still posted. Someone else will come collecting. Then I'll have the same conversation with them," Clay replied. "Now get." They watched the bounty hunters mount up and ride away, disappearing into the heat shimmer rising off the trail. Only then did Clay lower his gun, his hands shaking slightly with released tension. "Pa!" Thomas threw himself at Clay, small arms wrapping tight around his legs. "You were so brave, just like the heroes in Ma's stories." Clay lifted the boy, holding him close. "Just protecting my family, son. Nothing heroic about that." But Maggie was looking at him with something like awe. "Clay, you could have been killed. So could you." He reached out with his free arm, pulling her against his side. "That's not happening, not while I'm breathing." They didn't camp that night, pushing on through darkness to reach Denver by dawn. The city was bigger than Thomas's eyes could hold, buildings of brick and stone rising like cliffs along busy streets. They found a respectable hotel, and Clay insisted on adjoining rooms despite the expense. "I want you where I can protect you," he said when Maggie protested the cost. The next morning, they visited the merchant's bank. Clay had expected trouble, but the manager, Mr. Ellington, proved surprisingly helpful. "Oh yes, Mrs. O'Brien," he said, checking his ledgers. "We've been holding these funds for some months. Terrible tragedy about your husband." The insurance company was quite clear: accidental death due to a lamp mishap. Very common, I'm afraid, especially when drink is involved. He produced not only the $500, but also a letter from the insurance investigator detailing his findings. Clay read it with growing satisfaction. The investigator had been thorough, interviewing neighbors who confirmed Richard's drinking and violent tendencies, examining the fire pattern that clearly showed accidental origin. "This completely exonerates you," Clay said. "From legal charges, perhaps," Maggie said quietly. "But Sheriff Watson won't care about facts." "Then we make him care," Clay decided. "Mr. Ellington, might you direct us to a good lawyer?" The lawyer, Marcus Hartwell, was a sharp-dressed man with clever eyes who listened to their story with growing interest. "Sheriff Watson has no legal standing to pursue you outside his jurisdiction," he said when they finished. "And with this evidence, no Colorado court would hear the case. However, the reward he's posted illegally is another matter. Technically, that's fraud, offering payment for an illegal arrest." "Can you make it go away?" Clay asked bluntly. Hartwell smiled like a well-fed cat. "Mr. Thornton, making problems go away is my specialty. Give me 2 days and authorization to act on your behalf. I'll have that reward rescinded and a letter from the territorial judge stating Mrs. Thornton, I assume you've married since, is free of all charges." They spent those 2 days showing Thomas the city. He was enchanted by everything, the trains most of all, the shops full of wonders, the sheer number of people. But Clay noticed Maggie growing quieter as they walked the paved streets, her mountain tan looking out of place among the pale city ladies in their fancy clothes. "Missing the ranch?" he asked that evening as they watched Thomas play with a toy train he'd insisted on buying him. "Missing our life," she corrected. "This was my world once, cities and society and proper manners. But now, it feels like wearing clothes that don't fit anymore. We'll be home soon," Clay promised. "Home," she repeated, smiling. "Yes, that's what it is now. Home." Hartwell was as good as his word. 2 days later, he presented them with a sheaf of documents, the reward officially rescinded, a judge's statement clearing Maggie of all charges, and, as a bonus, a cease and desist order against Sheriff Watson should he continue his harassment. The judge was not impressed by a sheriff overstepping his authority for personal revenge. Hartwell explained, "You should have no more trouble from that quarter." They left Denver the next morning. Wagon loaded with supplies and gifts, fabric for new clothes, books for Thomas, seed for Maggie's planned garden, and a few head of good breeding stock Clay couldn't resist. But the most valuable thing they carried was invisible, the freedom that came from facing the past and winning. The journey home was different. Maggie sang as they traveled, her voice carrying across the empty spaces. Thomas chattered constantly about all he'd seen, and Clay felt something ease in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying since those bounty hunters appeared. On their last night before reaching the ranch, they camped by a stream under ancient cottonwoods. After Thomas fell asleep, Clay and Maggie sat by the fire, watching sparks rise toward the stars. "Thank you," Maggie said softly, "for standing up for me, for believing me, for making me face this instead of running forever. You're my wife," Clay said simply. "Your fights are my fights. Your fears are mine to help carry. That's what marriage means." She moved into his arms, fitting against him like she'd been carved for that purpose. "I love you, Clayton Thornton, more than I have words for." "Show me," he suggested, and she did, there under the vast Wyoming sky, with the fire burning low and the night sounds wrapping around them like a blessing. They reached the ranch late the next afternoon. Tom Brennan had done well in their absence. The cattle were tended. The repairs continued. Even some early plowing done in the home field. But it was clear from his relief that he was glad to hand responsibility back. "Place ain't the same without you folks," he said, refusing Clay's offer of payment. Too quiet. Even the chickens seemed moody. That evening, as Maggie cooked their first dinner home and Thomas played with his train on the kitchen floor, Clay stood on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains gold. The confrontation with the bounty hunters could have ended so differently. They'd taken a risk going to Denver, faced down the shadows that had chased them, but they'd won. More than that, they'd claimed their life together openly, officially, irrevocably. No more looking over shoulders, no more tensing at strangers, no more fear that the past would reach out to snatch their happiness. Maggie joined him, slipping her arm through his. "What are you thinking?" "About second chances," Clay said, "about how a man can think his life is set in stone, then have everything change because a desperate woman and child show up in a snowstorm." "Regrets?" she teased. He turned to face her fully, cupping her face in his hands. "Never, not one. You and Thomas, you're my life now. Everything before was just marking time. Even the parts where you threatened 3 armed men for me. Especially those parts," Clay said firmly. "I'd face down 100 men to keep you safe. 1,000. She rose on her toes to kiss him, soft and sweet and full of promise. "My protector, my husband, my love." From inside came Thomas's voice. "Ma, Pa, supper's burning." They laughed, breaking apart, and went inside to save dinner and continue building their life together. The past was settled. The future spread before them like the prairie, vast and challenging but full of possibility. And they'd meet it as they'd met everything else, hand in hand, hearts united, a family forged in winter's trial and spring's sweet return. Summer had settled over the ranch like a benediction, bringing long days of hard work and peaceful evenings on the porch. The garden Maggie had planted was thriving, green rows of vegetables promising good eating come fall. Thomas had grown 2 inches and lost his city pallor, brown as a berry from helping with the ranch work. Clay had never known such contentment, waking each morning to Maggie's warmth beside him, working his land with purpose beyond mere survival, returning each evening to a home filled with laughter and light, which made the stranger's appearance all the more jarring. Clay first spotted him from the north pasture where he was checking on the new calves. A lone rider, moving slow and steady down the main road, something about his posture setting off alarms in Clay's mind. This wasn't a drifter looking for work or a neighbor paying a social call. This man had purpose. By the time Clay made it back to the house, the stranger was tying his horse at the front gate. He was tall, well-dressed in a black suit despite the heat, with iron-gray hair and eyes like chips of winter ice. Something familiar about the set of his jaw, the way he held himself, made Clay's hand drift toward his gun. "Help you," Clay called from the porch. The man turned, and Clay saw Maggie's face drain of color through the kitchen window. She knew him. "I'm looking for Margaret O'Brien," the stranger said. His voice was cultured, Eastern, with an edge like a concealed blade. "I was told in town she might be here. No one here by that name," Clay said evenly. "You've been misinformed," the man smiled, but it didn't reach those cold eyes. "Come now, Mr. Thornton, let's not play games. I know she's here. I know she's calling herself your wife. I'm not here to cause trouble, merely to collect what's mine. And you are. Forgive my manners. Josiah Blackwood. I'm Richard O'Brien's brother." Clay felt the world tilt slightly. Brother. Maggie had never mentioned a brother-in-law. "Richard O'Brien is dead." "Yes, I'm aware." Blackwood's smile turned predatory. "Burned alive, or so I'm told. Very convenient for Margaret. The fire was an accident. Insurance investigators confirmed it. Your brother was drunk. Knocked over a lamp. My brother was many things. Mr. Thornton, but clumsy wasn't one of them." Blackwood stepped closer to the porch. "I've spent months investigating his death, talking to witnesses, reading between the lines of those very convenient insurance reports. Would you like to know what I've learned?" Clay heard the kitchen door open behind him. Maggie stepped out, Thomas clinging to her skirts. She'd gone pale but stood straight, chin up, facing the man who'd haunted her nightmares. "Josiah," she said quietly, "I wondered when you'd come." "Hello, Margaret?" His eyes raked over her, dismissive. "Farm life agrees with you. You look almost common." "What do you want?" Clay demanded, stepping protectively closer to Maggie. "What's mine?" Blackwood repeated. "You see, my brother and I were partners in several ventures. When he died, his share should have passed to me. Instead, his wife disappeared with certain documents, papers that prove ownership of valuable mining claims in Colorado. Claims that are now worth a fortune." "I don't know what you're talking about," Maggie said. "Don't insult my intelligence. Richard wrote me about those claims, bragged about the fortune he'd make. Those papers were in his strongbox, the same strongbox that mysteriously vanished the night of the fire." Clay's mind raced. Maggie had never mentioned mining claims. But then, she'd fled with nothing but Thomas and the clothes on her back. If she had taken papers, where were they? Even if such papers existed, Clay said carefully, they'd belong to Richard's widow, not his brother. Blackwood's face darkened. "His widow, who killed him?" "That's a lie," Thomas burst out suddenly. "Ma didn't hurt Pa. He hurt us. He was mean and scary and—" "Quiet, boy," Blackwood snapped, and Thomas flinched back. That was a mistake. Clay's temper, carefully controlled, snapped like dry kindling. "You'll not speak to my son that way. Not on my land." "Your son?" Blackwood laughed. "That's rich, playing house with another man's child, another man's wife. Tell me, Thornton, does she warm your bed as eagerly as she warmed Richard's? Or did she seduce you with tears and sad stories?" Clay's fist connected with Blackwood's jaw before rational thought could intervene. The man staggered back, hand going to his mouth, coming away bloody. "I'll have you arrested for assault." Blackwood snarled. "Try it." Clay growled. "Sheriff knows me, knows you're not welcome here. Now get off my land before I forget my manners entirely." Blackwood straightened his coat, eyes glittering with malice. "This isn't over. Those claims are worth $50,000, and I'll have them one way or another. If Margaret won't be reasonable, perhaps the law will be more accommodating. After all, theft is still a crime, even when committed by a grieving widow." He mounted his horse, looking down at them with contempt. "You have 1 week to produce those papers. Otherwise, I'll return with the sheriff and a warrant. We'll see how your protective instincts serve you then, Thornton." They watched him ride away, dust settling in his wake like ashes. Thomas was crying silently, and Maggie pulled him close, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Inside," Clay said quietly. "Now, In the kitchen, Maggie sank into a chair, looking older than her years. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have told you. About the mining claims? About Blackwood? Clay kept his voice level with effort. Yes, you should have. No more secrets. Maggie, not between us. She nodded, taking a shaky breath. Richard won those claims in a poker game about a month before he died. He was drunk, boasting about how rich we'd be. The other players were angry, said he'd cheated. There was almost a fight, but Richard had the papers, all legal and proper. And you took them when you fled? She stood abruptly, going to the pantry. From behind a loose board, she withdrew an oilskin packet. I grabbed what I could from his strongbox, money, papers, anything that might help us survive. I didn't even know what these were until later. Clay examined the documents. Mining claims in Clear Creek County, Colorado, all properly filed and witnessed. And according to the latest territorial assessments noted on the margins, Blackwood hadn't exaggerated their value. $50,000, Clay murmured. That's a fortune. Blood money, Maggie said bitterly. Richard probably did cheat for them. He usually did, and now Josiah wants them, and he won't stop until he gets them. Why didn't you tell me? She met his eyes, tears finally spilling over. Because I was afraid. Afraid you'd think I was using you, that I'd married you for protection. Afraid those claims would bring nothing but trouble. I just wanted to forget they existed, to build a life here without the shadow of Richard's schemes hanging over us. Clay set the papers aside and pulled her into his arms. I could never think you were using me. But Maggie, we're partners. That means sharing burdens, not carrying them alone. I know. I'm sorry. Josiah terrifies me. He's worse than Richard in some ways. Smarter, more controlled. Richard's violence was hot, impulsive. Josiah's is cold, calculated. He'll destroy us if he can. Then we don't let him. Clay said firmly. Those claims are yours, legal and proper. We'll fight for them if we have to. But what if he brings the sheriff? What if... Then we face it, together, like we always do. He tipped her chin up. I'm not letting anyone take you from me. Maggie, not bounty hunters, not sheriffs, and sure as hell not some city vulture in a fancy suit. Thomas, who'd been silent through this exchange, tugged on Clay's shirt. Pa? Are we going to be okay? Clay lifted the boy, feeling the small body trembling. We're going to be fine. Son, just some grown-up business to sort out. I don't like that man. He looks at Ma mean. I don't like him either, Clay admitted. But he's gone now, and he won't hurt you or your ma. I promise. That evening, after Thomas was in bed, Clay and Maggie sat at the kitchen table with the mining claim documents spread before them. We could just give them to him, Maggie said quietly. Make him go away. Is that what you want? She was quiet for a long moment. No, it's not about the money. It's about... Richard took everything from me. My father, my home, my dignity. These claims are the only thing I have left from that life. The only thing of value. Giving them to Josiah feels like letting Richard win even from the grave. Then we keep them. File them proper in your new name. Make them ironclad legal. And if Josiah comes back with the law, Clay smiled grimly. Then we'll be ready. I've got friends in this territory. Maggie, men who remember when I helped them out of tight spots. Sheriff owes me more than one favor. Judge Carpenter bought his prize bull from my stock. We're not without resources. I've brought you nothing but trouble, she said sadly. First the running, then the bounty hunters. Now this. You must regret. Stop. Clay caught her hands. You've brought me life, joy, love, a son, a future worth having. I'd face Josiah Blackwood and a dozen like him before I'd regret one moment with you. She squeezed his hands. What did I do to deserve you? Survived, he said simply. Survived and kept faith that something better was waiting. That takes a kind of courage I'm only just learning. They made love that night with a desperate passion, as if trying to hold back the darkness gathering at their borders. Afterward, Maggie lay in Clay's arms, listening to his heartbeat, memorizing the sound. I'm scared, she whispered into the darkness. I know, but fear's just another kind of weather. Maggie girl. It passes. And if it doesn't, then we learn to dance in the rain. 3 days passed in tense normalcy. Clay went about ranch work, but kept his guns close and his eyes on the horizon. Maggie tried to maintain routine for Thomas's sake, but jumped at every unexpected sound. On the 4th day, their waiting ended. Sheriff Ben Morrison rode up with 2 deputies, and Clay's heart sank when he saw Josiah Blackwood riding alongside them. But Morrison's first words surprised him. "Clay," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "Mrs. Thornton, sorry to bother you, but Mr. Blackwood here's made some serious allegations. Says your wife stole valuable property from his late brother. My wife inherited property from her late husband." Clay corrected. "Nothing stolen about it." Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Thing is, Blackwood's got himself a lawyer. Filed papers saying those mining claims were partnership property, not personal. Says he's got documents to prove it. Forged, no doubt," Maggie said quietly. Blackwood smiled coldly. "Careful, Margaret. Slander is also actionable." "Ben, you know me," Clay said to the sheriff. "Known me for 10 years. Have I ever lied to you?" "No, Clay, you haven't. That's why I'm here personal instead of sending deputies with a warrant." Morrison shifted in his saddle. "Way I see it, this is a civil matter, not criminal. Should be handled by lawyers and judges, not sheriffs." "My lawyer disagrees," Blackwood said smoothly. "Theft is theft, regardless of the relationship between parties?" Morrison's expression hardened. "Mr. Blackwood, I've been sheriff here for 12 years. I know the law. Unless you've got proof, real proof, not just accusations, that Mrs. Thornton stole something, there's no crime here. And frankly, I'm getting tired of outsiders thinking they can come into my territory and throw their weight around." "You'll regret this, Sheriff," Blackwood warned. "Probably. I regret most Monday mornings." Morrison turned back to Clay. "That said, you folks might want to get this sorted legal-like. Head off more trouble." After the sheriff and his men left, Blackwood remained, sitting his horse like a general surveying a battlefield. "You've won this round," he said. "But I'm not leaving empty-handed. One way or another, I'll have what's mine. The only thing you'll get from us is a load of buckshot if you come on our land again," Clay said evenly. "That's not a threat. Blackwood, that's a promise." "We'll see." Blackwood's gaze shifted to Maggie. "You always were too pretty for Richard. Too refined. He never could handle you properly. Spent half his time drunk because you made him feel inferior. Did you know that? You drove him to drink with your airs and graces, your constant disappointment." "That's enough," Clay growled, but Blackwood continued. "I tried to warn him against marrying you. Told him a woman like you would be nothing but trouble. But he was besotted. Said you were an angel come to earth." His laugh was ugly. "Some angel. You destroyed him piece by piece, then burned him alive when you were done." "Get out," Clay said, cocking his rifle. "Now." Blackwood smiled that cold smile again. 1 week, Margaret. 1 week to realize you can't win this fight. After that, things will get unpleasant. He touched his hat mockingly. "Good day." As his dust faded down the road, Maggie turned and walked into the house without a word. Clay found her in their bedroom, face buried in a pillow, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Don't let him poison you," Clay said, sitting beside her. Nothing he said was true, but what if it was? She looked up, eyes red and swollen. What if I did drive Richard to drink? What if I could have been a better wife? Maybe changed him? "Stop." Clay pulled her against him. Richard was a grown man who made his own choices. You didn't force whiskey down his throat or make him raise his fists. Evil men always blame others for their evil. "Don't you dare take that weight on yourself. I just want it to be over," she whispered. "I want to stop running, stop fighting, stop being afraid. Then we end it," Clay said decisively. "Tomorrow, we ride to town. File those claims in your name proper. Get our own lawyer. Make it clear that Josiah Blackwood has no legal or moral claim on anything of yours. And if he doesn't accept that," Clay's expression was grim, "then we make him accept it, one way or another. This ends now." They held each other in the afternoon light, drawing strength from their connection. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain or worse. But inside, in the circle of their arms, they found shelter. Temporary, perhaps, but real and warm and worth defending against all the Josiah Blackwoods of the world. The battle wasn't over. Men like Blackwood didn't give up easily, especially when money was involved. But Clay had fought for this land, this life, this love. He'd fight again if needed, as many times as it took, because some things were worth any price, and the family he'd found in a winter storm was chief among them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had each other, and that was enough. That was everything. The gunshot came at dawn, shattering the peaceful morning like glass. Clay rolled from bed, grabbing his rifle in one smooth motion. Maggie already reaching for Thomas to pull him close. The second shot followed immediately, somewhere near the barn. "Stay here," Clay commanded, checking his ammunition. "Bar the door behind me. Clay, do it!" He was already moving, barefoot despite the cold floor, every instinct screaming danger. The yard was eerily quiet as Clay slipped from the house, using the shadows for cover. His cattle were bawling in distress, and he could smell smoke. Not wood smoke, but the acrid stench of burning hay. The barn. He rounded the corner to find Josiah Blackwood standing calmly by the barn doors, a smoking pistol in his hand. Two of Clay's best milk cows lay dead in the paddock, and flames were already licking at the hay stored in the loft. "Morning, Thornton," Blackwood said conversationally. "Thought I'd get your attention." "You son of a—" Clay raised his rifle, but Blackwood held up a document. "Before you do something rash, you might want to read this, fresh from Judge Harlan in Denver. Seems he's more sympathetic to my cause than your local sheriff." Clay kept the rifle trained on him. "The barn? Oh, that. Unfortunate accident. Lantern must have tipped over when I was looking for you." Blackwood's smile was sharp as a blade. "Better tend to it before you lose everything. Again, so unfortunate how fires start around the O'Brien family." Rage nearly consumed Clay's reason, but the spreading flames demanded action. He could already hear horses screaming inside the barn. Without lowering his rifle, he backed toward the structure. "Maggie," he bellowed. "Fire! Bring water!" The next minutes were chaos. Clay kicked in the barn side door, smoke billowing out in black clouds. 3 horses were trapped in their stalls, panicking as flames spread through the hay above. He grabbed a blanket, throwing it over the nearest horse's head, leading the terrified animal out. Maggie appeared with buckets, Thomas right behind her, and they formed a desperate brigade. By the time they got the animals out and the fire controlled, Blackwood had positioned himself on their porch, that damned document still in his hand. "Quite the morning exercise," he observed as they staggered back, soot-stained and exhausted. "Now, shall we discuss business?" Clay's rifle was in the house, but his Colt hung at his hip. His hand hovered near it as he faced Blackwood. "Get off my property. Our property. According to this." Blackwood waved the paper. "You see, I've done some research. Those mining claims Richard won, the game was played in a partnership property. Everything won belonged to both brothers. Judge Harlan agreed. This document gives me legal right to half of everything Margaret inherited, including, it seems, interest in this charming ranch." "That's impossible," Maggie said. "Clay owned this ranch before we married." "Ah, but did he? Or did you invest your inherited funds in improvements? Commingled assets, the lawyers call it, makes everything so much more complicated." Blackwood's eyes glittered with satisfaction. "Of course, I'm a reasonable man. Sign over the mining claims, and I'll relinquish any interest in your domestic situation." Clay felt Maggie's hand on his arm, restraining. She stepped forward, chin raised despite the soot and exhaustion. "Let me see that document." Blackwood handed it over with exaggerated courtesy. Maggie read quickly, her face paling. This can't be legal. Judge Carpenter has no jurisdiction in Colorado matters. Judge Harlan, however, does, and he owed Richard money, as it happens, gambling debts, which I now hold. His smile widened. You'd be amazed how cooperative people become when you own their secrets. You're no better than your brother, Maggie said quietly, using people's weaknesses against them. I'm exactly like my brother, dear sister-in-law, except smarter. Richard let emotion rule him. I prefer cold calculation. He gestured at the smoldering barn. This is just the beginning. Sign over those claims, or watch everything you've built burn. Your choice. Thomas, who'd been silent through this exchange, suddenly darted forward. You're mean! You hurt our cows and burned our barn! I hate you! Blackwood backhanded the boy casually, sending him sprawling. The crack of impact echoed across the yard. Clay's vision went red. His Colt was in his hand without conscious thought. The barrel pressed against Blackwood's temple before the man could blink. Touch my son again, Clay said, his voice deadly quiet. And they'll find pieces of you from here to Denver. Blackwood had gone very still. Threatening a man with legal documents? Not wise. Thornton. Legal? Clay laughed, a harsh sound. You burned my barn, killed my stock, struck my child. Sheriff Morrison might be interested in that. Your word against mine, and who do you think the law will believe? An established businessman or a rancher harboring a fugitive wife? Clay cocked the hammer. The click was loud as thunder. Right now. I don't much care about the law. Clay. Maggie's voice, steady despite everything. Don't. He's not worth hanging for. For a long moment, violence trembled in the air like heat shimmer. Then Clay stepped back, holstering his weapon. You've got 1 minute to get off my land. Blackwood straightened his coat, but Clay saw his hands shaking slightly. This isn't over. That document is legal and binding. You have 3 days to comply, or I'll return with the sheriff and a court order. And next time, I won't come alone. He mounted his horse, looking down at them with renewed confidence now that Clay's gun was holstered. 3 days. Margaret, don't make this harder than necessary. They watched him ride away. Then Clay knelt beside Thomas, checking the boy's face. A red mark was already rising on his cheek. I'm okay, Pa, Thomas said, trying to be brave. He hit softer than my real PA did. The simple statement broke Clay's heart. He pulled the boy close, feeling the small body tremble. No one's going to hit you again, son. No one. We need to leave, Maggie said quietly. Tonight. Take what we can carry and run. No. Clay stood, still holding Thomas. We're done running. This is our home, our land, our life. Blackwood wants a fight? He'll get one. But that document may be legal in Colorado. This is Wyoming, and I know every judge, every lawyer, every lawman in this territory. Blackwood made a mistake coming here, threatening us on our own ground. He met her eyes. Trust me, Maggie, we're going to end this. They spent the morning cleaning up the fire damage and tending the dead cattle. The barn was salvageable, though they'd lost half their winter hay. As they worked, Clay's mind turned over possibilities, strategies, options. By noon, he'd made his decision. Pack for a few days' travel. He told Maggie, we're going to town, all of us. Clay, not to run, to fight, but smart-like. He managed a grim smile. Blackwood wants to use the law against us? Fine, 2 can play that game. They reached Cedar Falls as the sun was setting, their wagon loaded with essentials and the precious mining documents. Clay drove straight to the finest hotel in town, causing Maggie to protest. We can't afford. Yes, we can. Image matters in these things. We're successful ranchers, not desperate fugitives. He helped her down from the wagon. First rule of fighting men like Blackwood: never look weak. Their first stop the next morning was Marcus Hartwell's law office. The Denver lawyer had opened a branch in Cedar Falls, and his eyes sharpened with interest as Clay laid out the situation. Blackwood, you say? Josiah Blackwood. Hartwell leaned back. I've heard of him. Sharp operator out of Chicago. Several questionable deaths in his wake, though nothing ever proved. Can his claim hold water here? Clay asked bluntly. In Wyoming? Doubtful. Judge Carpenter won't honor a Colorado ruling obtained through duress. But Blackwood's clever. He'll try to muddy the waters. Make it expensive to fight. Hartwell studied the mining claims. These are worth fighting for. Question is, how dirty are you willing to get? As dirty as needed, Maggie said firmly, surprising both men. I'm tired of being the victim, tired of men like Richard and Josiah thinking they own me. What do we do? Hartwell smiled like a shark scenting blood. First, we file an injunction against Blackwood for destruction of property. The barn, the cattle, that's criminal behavior. Get him on the defensive. Second, we research his past. Men like him always have secrets. Third, he paused. This is delicate, but Richard O'Brien's death, you have documents proving it was accidental? Insurance papers, witness statements, everything. Maggie confirmed. Good, because I'd bet my fee that Blackwood will try to resurrect those murder charges. We need to be ready. He pulled out fresh paper. Now, tell me everything about Richard's partnership with his brother. Every detail. They spent 3 hours in Hartwell's office, building their case. By the time they emerged, Clay felt something he hadn't experienced since Blackwood's arrival. Hope. Their next stop was Sheriff Morrison's office. The sheriff listened grimly to their account of the morning's events. Burned your barn. Killed cattle? Morrison's face darkened. Why didn't you come to me immediately? We're here now. Clay said, Question is, what can you do about it? Plenty. Destruction of property. Assault on a minor. Thomas' son. Can you tell me exactly what happened? Thomas perched on his mother's lap, nodded solemnly, and recounted the morning's events in his clear child's voice. When he finished, Morrison looked ready to spit nails. I'll put out a warrant. The sheriff decided, bring Blackwood in for questioning. Can't have outsiders thinking they can terrorize our people. He'll claim it's all lies, Maggie warned. Maybe, but I've got something he doesn't. 12 years of knowing Clay Thornton's character. Your word means something here. Clay. His doesn't. As they left the sheriff's office, Clay felt the tide beginning to turn. This was their territory, their community. Blackwood had overplayed his hand. That evening in their hotel room, after Thomas was asleep, Clay and Maggie sat by the window overlooking the town's main street. I've been thinking, Maggie said quietly, about those claims. What if we just let them go? Sold them, gave Blackwood his supposed share, ended this? Is that what you want? She was quiet for a long moment. I used to think holding on to them was about justice, about not letting Richard win, but now, she looked at Clay. Now I think it's about us, our future. With that money, we could expand the ranch, buy more land, build something Thomas can be proud to inherit. Then we fight for them. But the cost? Some things are worth any cost. Clay took her hands. Those claims are yours by right. Blackwood's trying to steal them through legal trickery and intimidation. If we let him win, what does that teach Thomas? That bullies always get their way? No, she said firmly. No, you're right. We make our stand. A knock at the door interrupted them. Clay answered cautiously, hand near his gun. To find Sheriff Morrison with a satisfied expression. Found your Mr. Blackwood at the Silver Dollar Saloon. The sheriff reported. Drunk as a lord and bragging about how he'd run you folks off by week's end. Arrested him for destruction of property and assault. He's cooling his heels in my jail right now. He'll make bail. Clay predicted. Eventually, but Judge Carpenter's out fishing until Monday. Gives you time to prepare. Morrison's smile was sharp. Funny thing, when we arrested him, we found some interesting papers in his possession, documents that looked mighty like forgeries. Seems your brother-in-law might have more legal troubles than he expected. After the sheriff left, Clay felt Maggie sag against him in relief. It's not over, she whispered. No, but we're not alone in this fight. That's what Blackwood didn't understand. We've got community here, roots, people who'll stand with us. That night, for the first time since Blackwood's arrival. They made love without the shadow of fear hanging over them, in the hotel's soft bed, far from the ranch but somehow closer than ever. They reaffirmed what truly mattered: their connection, their commitment, their refusal to let the past destroy their future. The next morning brought news. Hartwell arrived at breakfast with a telegram and a grim smile. "Did some checking on our Mr. Blackwood," he announced. "Turns out there's a warrant for him in Illinois. Fraud charges. Something about forged mining deeds. Seems to be a pattern with him." "Can we use that?" Clay asked. "Already have. Sent word to the Illinois authorities. They're very interested in Mr. Blackwood's current whereabouts." Hartwell signaled the waiter for coffee. "Additionally, I've found 3 other cases where Blackwood tried similar schemes. Each time, he backed off when faced with serious legal opposition." "He's a coward," Maggie said quietly. "Just like Richard. Brave when facing women and children, but put him against real opposition." "Exactly. Which brings me to my proposal." Hartwell leaned forward. "We go on the offensive. File charges for attempted fraud, destruction of property, assault, demand damages. Make it clear that coming after you will cost him everything." "Do it," Clay said immediately. The next few days passed in a blur of legal maneuvers. Blackwood, released on bail, found himself facing a mounting pile of charges. His forged Colorado document was challenged and found wanting. The Illinois warrant added pressure. Town opinion, carefully cultivated by Sheriff Morrison, turned sharply against the outsider who'd attacked a local family. It came to a head 5 days after the barn burning. Clay was meeting with potential cattle buyers when Blackwood appeared at the hotel restaurant, looking haggard and desperate. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Clay studied him. The fancy suit was rumpled. The controlled demeanor cracked. "Talk. This has gotten out of hand. I came here for simple justice, my share of my brother's legacy. Instead, I'm facing persecution. You came here with forged documents and threats. You burned my property, struck my son." Clay's voice was level, dangerous. "Your lucky prosecution is all you're facing." Blackwood's mask finally slipped entirely. "She killed him. My brother, my partner. She killed him, and you're protecting her. Your brother killed himself with drink and meanness. Maggie and Thomas were just lucky to survive him." Clay stood, towering over the seated man. "You want to end this? Drop all claims. Leave Wyoming. Never contact my family again. Do that, and maybe the Illinois authorities lose track of you." "And if I refuse?" "Then we finish this in court. All of it. Every charge, every forgery, every crime you've committed chasing money that was never yours." Clay smiled coldly. "Your choice, Blackwood. But choose fast. My patience is about gone." Blackwood stared up at him, and Clay saw the moment he broke. The bluster, the threats, the carefully constructed menace, all of it crumbled, leaving just a bitter, greedy man who'd overreached. "I'll need assurances," Blackwood said finally. "Written agreements that you won't pursue charges. Hartwell will draw up the papers. You'll sign away any claim to the mining documents, any interest in my wife's inheritance, any connection to my family. In exchange, we let you leave with your freedom." "And if I come back?" Clay leaned down, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Then we finish this the way we should have that morning at the ranch, and nobody will ever find your body. That's not a legal threat. Blackwood, that's a promise from one man to another." Blackwood paled, reading truth in Clay's eyes. "I'll sign." The papers were drawn up that afternoon. Blackwood signed with shaking hands, then left town on the evening stage. Not looking back, Sheriff Morrison made sure he actually boarded, then sent telegrams to lawmen along the route, ensuring their unwelcome visitor kept moving. That night, in their hotel room, Maggie cried, not from fear or sorrow, but from sheer relief. "It's over. It's really over. This part is," Clay agreed, holding her close. "No more running, no more looking over your shoulder. Just us and our life, free and clear." Thomas, bouncing on the bed despite being told not to, grinned wide. "Does this mean we can go home now?" "Yes, son," Clay said, ruffling his hair. We can go home." They returned to the ranch the next day to find neighbors had already begun rebuilding the barn. Tom Brennan organized the effort, saying simply, "Folks take care of their own out here." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Clay stood with his family on their porch. The mining claims were safely deposited in the bank, their value secure for their future. The barn would be rebuilt stronger than before. The past, in the form of both Richard and Josiah, was finally laid to rest. "Thank you," Maggie said softly, her arm through his. "For fighting for us, for believing in us, for showing Thomas what a real man looks like." "Thank you," Clay replied, "for bringing me back to life, for making this place a home, for being strong enough to stand and fight when it mattered." Thomas, sitting on the porch steps whittling badly at a piece of wood Clay had given him, looked up. "Are we going to have any more adventures, Pa?" Clay laughed, pulling Maggie closer. "Son, with your ma around, I suspect we'll have plenty. But maybe we could space them out a bit more." "Next time," Maggie said firmly. "We're having a nice, quiet adventure, like raising cattle or planting crops or something wonderfully boring." "Boring sounds perfect," Clay agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. But as the stars came out over their ranch, over their home, over their hard-won peace, Clay knew the truth. With Maggie and Thomas, even the quiet moments would be adventures, because they'd be together, facing whatever came, bound by choice and love and the fierce determination to protect what they'd built from the ashes of their pasts. The fight with Blackwood had tested them, proven their strength not just as individuals, but as a family. They'd won not through violence, but through law, community, and the courage to stand their ground. It was a victory worth more than any mining claim. It was the victory of belonging, of being home, of knowing that some things, once fought for and won, could never be taken away. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the freshly rebuilt barn as Clay watched Thomas practice roping fence posts. The boy had grown 3 inches since spring, his movements more confident, his laughter coming easier. From the kitchen window drifted the smell of apple pie and the sound of Maggie humming, that same sad melody she'd sung their first night, though now it carried contentment rather than sorrow. 3 months had passed since Josiah Blackwood's departure. The mining claims had been properly filed, their value already transforming the ranch. New cattle grazed in the expanded pastures. A proper windmill drew water from the deep well, and the house sported fresh paint and real glass windows that caught the morning light. Clay was checking the grain stores when he heard horses approaching, multiple riders, moving fast. His hand went automatically to his gun, old habits dying hard, but relaxed when he recognized Sheriff Morrison leading a small posse. "Clay," Morrison called, dismounting with unusual urgency. "We need your help. Got a situation brewing." Clay met him in the yard, noting the sheriff's grim expression. "What kind of situation?" "The Hendricks family, out by Willow Creek. Their girl Annie went missing 2 days ago. She's only 7. Morrison removed his hat, running a hand through graying hair. "We've searched the obvious places, but with the temperature dropping and wolves about—" "I'll get my gear," Clay said immediately. "Maggie can—" "Actually," Morrison interrupted, "I was hoping she'd come too. Annie's scared of men, apparently. Had some bad experiences before the Hendricks took her in. Might respond better to a woman's voice if we find her hiding." Clay found Maggie in the kitchen, flour dusting her arms as she rolled out another pie crust. Her face paled as he explained the situation. "Of course we'll help," she said, already untying her apron. "That poor child. Thomas can stay with the Brennans." "I want to help too," Thomas said from the doorway. "I'm good at finding things." Clay started to refuse, then reconsidered. The boy had sharp eyes and knew what it felt like to be scared and hiding. "All right, but you stay close. This isn't a game." They joined the search party within the hour. The Hendricks ranch was smaller than theirs, the buildings weathered but well-maintained. Mrs. Hendricks, a plump woman with kind eyes, was near hysterical with worry. "She's never run off before," she kept saying. "Such a good girl, quiet as a mouse. But yesterday something spooked her, wouldn't say what, and come evening, she was gone." "Any strangers been through?" Clay asked Mr. Hendricks, a steady man whose hands shook as he held his coffee. "None that we saw. But Annie, she came from a bad situation before, sometimes sees threats where there ain't none." His voice broke. "We just want our girl back safe." The search party split up, covering different sections of the property. Clay took his family along the creek line. Knowing lost children often followed water. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching underfoot, and Clay tried not to think about how cold the nights had been getting. "Annie," Maggie called periodically. "Annie, sweetheart, it's safe to come out. Your mama and papa are worried about you." They'd been searching for 2 hours when Thomas tugged on Clay's sleeve. "Pa, look." He pointed to a thick stand of willows near the creek bend. Something moved in there. Clay motioned for quiet, and they approached carefully. Hidden among the drooping branches was a small cave formed by erosion, barely visible unless you knew where to look. And from inside came the faintest sound, a child's whimper. "Annie?" Maggie called softly. "Honey, my name is Maggie. I'm here with my husband and our boy Thomas. We're here to help." A small face appeared in the cave entrance, pale, tear-streaked, terrified. Annie couldn't have weighed more than 40 pounds, her dress torn and dirty, her feet bare and bleeding. "Are you going to take me back to him?" she whispered. "Take you back to who, sweetheart?" Maggie kept her voice gentle, motherly. "The bad man, he found me, said he'd come for me at the Hendricks place, said I belonged to him." Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "I don't want to go with him. He hurt me before." Clay felt rage building in his chest, but kept his voice calm. "No one's taking you anywhere you don't want to go. Annie, can you tell us what the bad man looked like?" The girl shrank back. "Tall, dark hair with gray in it, fancy clothes. He said he was my uncle, but he's not. He just bought me from my real parents." Clay and Maggie exchanged horrified looks. Trafficking in children wasn't unheard of in the territories, but finding it this close to home turned Clay's stomach. "Annie," Maggie said, "would you like to come out? I promise we'll keep you safe. We'll take you back to the Hendricks, and the sheriff will make sure the bad man can't hurt you." It took patience and gentle coaxing, but eventually Annie crept from her hiding place into Maggie's waiting arms. The child clung to her desperately, sobbing with relief and exhaustion. "Thomas," Clay said quietly, "run back and fire 3 shots in the air. That's the signal we found her." As Thomas ran off, Clay studied the ground around the cave. Fresh boot prints, too large for Annie, led away upstream. Someone had been here recently, searching. Within minutes, the search party converged on their location. Mrs. Hendricks fell to her knees, gathering Annie into her arms, while Mr. Hendricks openly wept with relief. Sheriff Morrison took in the scene with professional interest. "The girl says someone's after her," Clay told him quietly, man claiming to be her uncle. "From her description and these tracks, I'd say he's been here looking for her." Morrison's face darkened. "I was afraid of something like this. Got a wire yesterday about a man named Silas Crawford, suspected of trafficking children from back east to mining camps, and worse. Description matches what you're saying. He's still around? That'd be my guess. Man like that doesn't give up easy when money's involved." Morrison studied the tracks. "Clay, I hate to ask, but you need trackers." Clay nodded. "Maggie can take Thomas home. I'll help you run this bastard down." "No," Maggie said firmly. "We're all going home, together, and the Hendricks are coming with us until this is resolved. Maggie, that man is hunting a child. Clay, he knows where the Hendricks live. They're not safe there." She met his eyes steadily. "We have room. We have men to stand guard. Sometimes the brave thing is to fort up and make them come to you." Morrison nodded slowly. "She's got a point. Crawford's dangerous, but he's also careful. Won't attack a fortified position. Might buy us time to get reinforcements from the territorial marshal. And so their strange caravan made its way back to the Thornton Ranch, the Hendricks family in their wagon. Annie held tight between her adoptive parents, the search party serving as impromptu guards. Clay rode ahead, checking for threats, his rifle across his saddle. They settled the Hendricks into the spare room, Annie refusing to let go of her mother's hand. Maggie made soup and fresh bread while Clay and Morrison organized defenses. Tom Brennan arrived with his sons, having heard the news, ready to help stand watch. "Never did like child stealers," Brennan said, checking his rifle. "Man who'd hurt a child ain't really a man at all." As darkness fell, they established a watch rotation. Clay took first shift, positioned where he could see all approaches to the house. The night was clear, stars brilliant overhead, and every shadow could hide a threat. Near midnight, Maggie joined him on the porch, bringing coffee and a thick blanket. "Can't sleep," she explained, settling beside him. "Keep thinking about Annie, what she must have endured. We'll keep her safe," Clay promised. "I know. It's just—" She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I was running with Thomas, terrified and desperate, I prayed for someone to help us, to stand between us and the danger. You became that answer. Clay, now we can be that for Annie. And we will be." He pulled her close. "No child gets hurt on our land. That's a promise." The attack came just before dawn. Clay was on watch when he spotted movement near the barn, two figures trying to use the building for cover. He fired a warning shot, bringing everyone instantly alert. "Crawford!" Clay shouted. "That you skulking in the shadows? Come on out!" A cultured voice replied from the darkness. "I'm here for my property. Nothing more. The girl belongs to me. I have papers." "Papers can be forged." Sheriff Morrison called from an upstairs window. "And children ain't property. You're under arrest for trafficking and attempted kidnapping." Crawford laughed. An ugly sound. "You frontier fools. Do you have any idea who I am? The connections I have? I'll burn this place to the ground before I leave empty-handed. Like you burned my barn," Clay asked coldly. "Oh, wait. That was the other piece of trash who thought he could threaten my family. He's running scared somewhere in Illinois now. You want to join him? I'm not some penny anti-criminal." Crawford snarled. "I have a legal claim." His words were cut off by gunfire. Crawford's companion had tried to rush the house, only to meet Tom Brennan's sharpshooting. The man went down, clutching his shoulder, weapon falling from nerveless fingers. "Anyone else want to try?" Clay called. "We've got ammunition to spare and righteousness on our side." For long moments, silence. Then Crawford's voice, closer now, from behind the chicken coop. "This isn't over. That girl is worth a fortune to the right buyers. You think you can protect her forever?" "Don't have to," Morrison replied. "Just until the territorial marshals arrive. Should be here by noon. I reckon, unless you'd prefer to settle this now. Save everyone the trouble of a trial." More silence. Then Clay caught movement. Crawford retreating toward the tree line where horses waited. Clay could have shot him, probably should have, but killing a fleeing man sat wrong with him, even one as vile as Crawford. "Let him go," Morrison said, reading Clay's hesitation. "We've got his partner. He'll talk to save his own neck. Crawford won't get far." As dawn broke properly, they assessed the situation. Crawford's accomplice, wounded but alive, was already spilling everything he knew to avoid a noose. The Hendricks family emerged from the house, Annie still clinging to her adoptive parents but looking less terrified. "Is the bad man gone?" she asked in her tiny voice. "Yes, sweetheart," Maggie assured her. "And he won't be coming back." The territorial marshals arrived as promised, taking custody of the prisoner and immediately organizing a manhunt for Crawford. They stayed long enough to take statements and compliment Clay on the defense of his home. "Heard about you, Thornton?" the lead marshal said. "Man who stands up for what's right. Territory could use more like you, just protecting my family and neighbors." Clay replied, "Any decent man would do the same." "You'd be surprised how few decent men there are when trouble comes calling," the marshal observed. The Hendricks stayed another night, until news came that Crawford had been captured trying to board a train in Cheyenne. Faced with multiple witnesses and his partner's testimony, he would hang for his crimes. As their neighbors prepared to leave, Mrs. Hendricks took Maggie's hands. "We can never repay what you've done, risking your lives for our Annie. No repayment needed," Maggie said firmly. "We're neighbors. Family, really. This is what family does." Annie, still shy but no longer terrified, tugged on Clay's coat. When he knelt to her level, she whispered, "Thank you, Mr. Clay. You're like the heroes in stories." "No, little one," Clay said gently. "The real hero is you. You were smart enough to hide, brave enough to survive. Don't ever forget how strong you are." As the Hendricks wagon rolled away, Annie waving from the back, Thomas looked up at his parents. "We did good, didn't we?" "We did good," Clay confirmed, ruffling his hair. "Clay," Maggie said suddenly, "I've been thinking, the money from those mining claims, what if we used some of it to help children like Annie, create a fund for families taking in orphans, or to help law enforcement stop men like Crawford?" Clay studied his wife, this woman who'd arrived scared and desperate, who'd grown into someone fearless and generous. "I think that's a fine idea, Mrs. Thornton, a fine idea indeed." As autumn deepened toward winter, their first anniversary of meeting approaching, Clay stood once more on the porch watching the sunset. But now Maggie stood with him, Thomas playing at their feet, the ranch spreading before them prosperous and peaceful. "That first night," Maggie said softly, "when I touched your hair while you pretended to sleep, I never imagined we'd build this life together. Safety, love, purpose. You've given me everything. Clay." He turned to face her, seeing in her eyes the same wonder he felt. "You've got it backwards. Maggie girl, I was just existing before you came. You brought me back to life, gave me family, showed me what I was fighting for all those lonely years. Then we saved each other," she concluded, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Ma, Pa, stop being mushy," Thomas protested, making them laugh. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clay pulled both of them close. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they'd face them as they always did, together, united, unbreakable. The ranch that had once echoed with solitude now rang with laughter. The man who'd built walls around his heart had torn them down for a desperate woman and frightened child. And in losing his defenses, Clay Thornton had found everything worth defending. In the distance, wolves howled their ancient song. But here in the circle of light and love, there was only warmth, only home, only the quiet miracle of lives rebuilt from ashes into something beautiful and enduring. The first snowflakes of winter began to fall, gentle as a blessing, as the Thornton family went inside together, leaving the vast Wyoming night to settle over their hard-won peace. Thank you all for listening to this story of love, redemption, and courage in the Old West. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more heartwarming tales of frontier life. And share your thoughts about Clay and Maggie's journey in the comments. Did their story touch your heart? What was your favorite moment? Let's discuss.